It was like 2 a.m. on the college campus, and we're trying to get from like one point to another, and we see these scooters, and we decided to take these scooters. And we kind of think about it, like while we're riding them, we're like, wouldn't it be fun to like kind of hack these? We're looking at these scooters, and what we realize is that through a vulnerable HTTP request, we could basically, instead of pinging one scooter, so the scooters they did this thing which was really annoying, where you could locate the scooters and they would flash their lights and make this really loud, audible like noise, like this music file or something. But what we realized is that through this vulnerability, like in a query, we could query every single scooter at once. Through auditing the MetaMask, the IRS criminal investigation and the Department of Homeland Security, they saw it pinged to my home IP. And that was all they needed to basically subpoena my network, get all my network traffic, and then began like an investigation where they intercepted me at the airport.
So another reason to get your own router or a VPN, right?
Yeah. 100%.
I was recently traveling in the United States, and I had to use Wi-Fi connections in hotels or free public or Wi-Fi connections. I'm very cautious using public Wi-Fi. Now, what was interesting, in one of the hotels, I read their policy for using the Wi-Fi. And honestly, I was quite surprised. They say that they have the right to read all of my traffic, to intercept my traffic and read everything that I send. Apart from all the legal issues, perhaps, with a statement like that, I personally don't want people seeing where I go. I don't want them to intercept my DNS queries, see any traffic that I'm sending. So I personally use a VPN whenever I connect to a hotel access point or to free Wi-Fi. And the VPN that I've been using for a long time is Proton VPN. I started using Proton because of recommendations from hackers and cybersecurity experts, as well as the recommendations in books such as these. And I personally, once again, use Proton VPN and have found them to be very useful. Big shout out to Proton for sponsoring this video.
Hey everyone, it's David Bommel back with a very special guest. Sam, welcome.
Hello.
Sam, it's great to have you here. You're very well known in the cybersecurity space, but just for people perhaps who don't know you, tell us a bit about yourself, because I love the story. You started when you were fairly young.
Yeah, I got into hacking when I was about probably 12 or 13 years old, like playing video games, but it kind of transitioned from there. Like after high school, pretty much the only thing I was doing was hacking stuff. So I think in about maybe 11th or 12th grade, I started working kind of like full time as a penetration tester and doing bug bounty. So then I spent the next probably 7 or 8 years doing full time bug bounty, and then transitioned into doing penetration testing. And I eventually started my own kind of consultancy, which was acquired by a company called Yuga Labs. And then now I do kind of like full time job work plus bug bounty. So I've been doing that for 12 years now, I think, just doing security stuff.
That's amazing. I mean, you're 24, is that right?
Yeah, 24.
That's a lot to do, at your age. But I think it's a huge motivation for people who are watching that you don't have to wait to get a whole bunch of degrees and do a whole bunch of stuff, right? You just start even if you're 12 years old.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the like really great things is I'll talk to people who are like maybe like 30 or 40, and the past kind of experience they have with security is like they'll have spent time trying to do like vulnerability research, but it was really like hostile. But nowadays you can kind of like hack anything, and companies are like a lot more receptive to it.
So your journey was, if I remember from what you said and what I've read about you, is that there was a game that you really liked, right? And that kind of like you started hacking the game, and then you found that bug bounty was similar to that. Is that correct to say?
Yeah. So I was playing a video game, and one of the richest players on the server was kind of like parading around, like wearing like the most expensive gear in the game. And I like talked to him, and I was like, "Hey, how'd you get your gear?" And he's like, "Oh, I hacked the game." And I was like, "I don't believe you. There's no way you did that." So he invited me to a forum, and like it was a kind of like hacking forum, but I was a total noob. I was 12 years old. I didn't really know what I was doing, but I was trying to like pretend I did. And eventually I kind of learned like the lingo and how to like talk to these guys. But eventually, after a few years, the game hacking community kind of turned to like a web hacking community, because there were different forums for these like communities of hackers, and these communities of like people playing games, and they're very hostile towards each other. So it was like back and forth, people hacking each other. And I kind of got involved in that scene. And that's kind of where I got my start for security.
It's amazing. And I mean, you were telling me off camera, these days, you go after like these big impact vulnerabilities. So can you tell us about, like, if it's possible, assuming it's not NDA and stuff, kind of the kind of stuff you're working on at the moment?
Yeah, sure. So me and a small team of people, we focus on like kind of high impact vulnerability research. And basically what that is like, we look for these little choke points. And these choke points can be anything where one vulnerability can impact, a large amount of people. So a lot of the research we did was in, for instance, vehicles, internet service providers, DNS, and we try to find these individual things where like one vulnerability, impacts, 100 million people. And it's kind of the work we're working on right now.
So you were telling me off camera something about a router vulnerability or something?
Yeah, sure. So 2 years ago, I noticed that I had been like hacked, and when I was testing,
You got hacked.
yeah, I was hacked. And the way I found out was because I was testing a specific exploit, and when I was sending traffic from my home network, and when I was logging the traffic on the second network, I noticed that when I would send a HTTP request on my home IP, another IP address from like a random DigitalOcean IP was resending that exact same HTTP request. And it was really spooky because, yeah, at first I thought it was just my computer that had been hacked, like I had malware on my device. But then I opened, from my iPhone, I sent the exact same request, and I noticed it was being replayed. And every single device in my network was doing that. So the conclusion was basically that my router modem was hacked. And it kind of began like a bit of curiosity for me where I wanted to figure out like how I got hacked. When we began looking into it, the ISP that I use is Cox Communications. And the theory that I had was that the internet service provider had been somehow compromised, or that was a potential vector for them to like attack me. So instead of, someone compromising my home device and then attacking my modem, what I thought had happened was someone had compromised my ISP and then targeted me. And so when we looked into it, we basically realized that there were features on Cox and there were features on like all ISPs where you can basically, 5 years ago, if you got a modem, you could manage your modem via opening like a port and then like connecting your port remotely. But nowadays, ISPs bake in the functionality to remotely manage your router from their website. So even, without you realizing it, once you get a modem set up in your house, it's already connected to ISP. And the ISP has the capability, if you call support and you're like, hey, can you restart my modem? They can actually do that because they have, through their, pathway, access to your router. And so what we did is we researched and we found that as an attacker, we can access the same functionality where we can basically push Wi-Fi settings, for instance, like updating password, updating DNS settings, restarting the router, locating the router, and other API calls like querying customers by name. So basically an attacker, the full kill chain would be really simple where an attacker could query like a business name, for instance, search the devices on that network, search the connected devices on that modem or router, and then push configuration settings to that modem or router. And this would include things like DNS settings. So an attacker could push DNS settings. Yeah, it's super crazy. The DNS settings basically would allow an attacker to have an attacker controlled resolution for like any website and then intercept that traffic as you proxy it. Obviously you can't bypass like HTTPS or SSL or TLS, but you can still intercept specific websites if you have a certificate or like have a targeted attack.
So basically you get access to perhaps millions of routers that people have at homes or offices by attacking them through the ISP's website or something, or an API. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. So imagine like a ISP support agent. They have like a whole suite of utilities to provide service for, an end user. And basically what we proved is that like through that kind of protocol that they'd set up, it was possible to target individuals and like things like that. So that's kind of like the research we do where it's like, there's like this one specific API vulnerability that allows access to like millions of home routers. And then like, we'll report that, we'll disclose it, and we'll help them like fix it.
But was it only your ISP or has this affected many ISPs?
It was only my ISP. I used, again, like Cox Communications, which is about 20 million customers, I think, in the US.
Yeah, but I mean, that's a massive impact, right? And you didn't have to break into their offices to do something. You could do this remotely. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was completely remotely. The only thing you needed was in fact, I guess you don't even really need that because you can query customers via name, but you basically extract out a hardware serial number, which is just like a numeric identifier, which is like predictable. And it's, a serial number that's on the device. So it's kind of guessable, but you basically just plug in the serial number to index the device that you wanted to talk to, and you'd be able to send commands to it, as in like, for instance, updating DNS, updating Wi-Fi settings, viewing password, things like that, or viewing connected devices to the Wi-Fi.
So let me see if I understand. You could remotely see what the customer had on their Wi-Fi network at home.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you could change the DNS or other settings to intercept the traffic. But it's insane that you could. So in other words, you could do a man-in-the-middle attack remotely. Because that's what happened to you.
Exactly. And that was what happened to me. And it was kind of scary because like you would think, like your router having like a password and stuff, like it's not going to be shared with the ISP, but some like through functionality like on the router, the ISPs can basically push those commands themselves or do that. So like it basically just exposes that like an attacker can compromise that component of an ISP and then, have access to devices. So
yeah, I've heard horror stories. I have one of the big ISPs over here in the UK is British Telecom, BT, and I've heard horror stories about them being able to see devices on your local LAN, which I mean, it's none of their business really. So would you agree with like, don't install an ISP router in your home router, in your home network or something, use a pfSense or some other kind of firewall. And if you can, rather replace that than use an ISP router.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think if you care about privacy, it's clear to me that like ISPs have like really overextensive access to device information. Yeah. Like you said, like there's no reason ISP should be able to see connected devices. And especially like managing your device, like them having the capability to modify DNS on a router remotely is kind of like
It's
scary
crazy.
to me. Yeah, because of the proof of concept is simply like that we demonstrated is that like, hey, an attacker could compromise this and then like target. And I think that's what may have happened to me. Obviously, like I was hacked, but I'm not really sure how. My theory is that it was through the ISP, but it was never proven, I guess.
I mean, there's vulnerabilities on a lot of these home routers, right? Because they sell them cheap. Um, it's just another, I think, reason for anyone who's interested in privacy or security to immediately replace their ISP router if that's what they're using. Use something else, and perhaps use a VPN so that the ISP doesn't even see it. I mean, that's what a lot of people in the privacy space would say. Just set up a VPN to a trusted VPN provider, because the ISPs, yeah, do you trust them to, in the UK, there's all the privacy stuff is also quite extreme. So, would you trust your ISP to not log all the websites you go to? But I mean, yours is also an amazing warning that they can see stuff and, you could get hacked.
Yeah, 100%. I definitely suggest that. Like getting a third-party DNS, if you want to use Cloudflare's DNS or any more privacy-focused one, feel free.
That's what you've been working on recently. Is that going to be published somewhere? Are you going to give us some more details about that, or are you teasing us?
Yeah, eventually I want to do a blog post about it. Normally, so the research we do, we'll normally do kind of like blog posts, and this is definitely one of those things that kind of deserves a full blog post. So we're kind of working on that at the moment.
So, I mean, other big things, and I want to get to cars because that's the sort of the focus of this video. But perhaps just before we do cars, and just for everyone who's watching, please go and read Sam's blog. It's amazing content there. And hopefully you can show us some of your blog as we talk about cars. But you also did stuff with Apple, right? Because Apple's the most secure operating system in the world, right?
Yeah, we did like a lot of work on Apple where one day I kind of like been doing a normal bug bounty process, and I'd actually been hacking PayPal. And when I was hacking PayPal, I saw like an apple.com endpoint, and I found a security vulnerability like kind of accidentally on the apple.com endpoint. And after I reported the web vulnerability to Apple, I kind of waited a few weeks, and I saw an email from Apple that they'd actually awarded the web vulnerability. And something that you may not know about like the Apple bug bounty program is that in the past, the Apple bug bounty program was specifically hardware. So even though the Apple devices all like run on this web infrastructure, they wouldn't really reward bounties for it. But after we got a bounty from Apple for like a web vulnerability, we decided to like go full hack Apple. So we spent 3 months, pretty much every day we wake up, and it was like 10 hours a day of like 3 months of just like nonstop hacking Apple. And we discovered like, I think over 100 vulnerabilities with maybe 15 of them being critical. Yeah. So an attacker, like at the end of the day, like we discovered that using only your user ID, you could retrieve like stored payment information, the address, phone number of the user. We had like RCE and iCloud services, so we could execute arbitrary commands. We had full like network access to Apple where it could pull source code, things like that. And all in all, it was like a pretty good haul. I think afterwards we made probably over like $500,000 between like 3 people, which at the time, for Apple, that was like a really big payout. It was a lot of like, I'm trying to remember any like specific vulnerabilities. Some of them, for instance, we had through the iCloud mail client, there was like warmable cross-site scripting. So if you remember Sammy Camcar with MySpace, where it would send a friend request back and forth, imagine that like over email, where you send an email to somebody, it takes over their mail client, emails all their people on their saved contact list, and it spreads like that. So we worked really closely with the Apple team. I think a few times we had to hop on a call with their legal team because the security team asked us to, they said, really prove the impact on this bug. So we pushed it really far. Mm-hmm. So for instance, we had a RCE and we wanted internal network access. So we had pivoted to another internal service where we had found like a server-side request forgery vulnerability. And through that, we were able to get like really deep in the Apple network. And then after we reported the bug, they're like, hey, hold on to this one a second. And then 2 weeks later, we're on a call with their legal team. And they're like, don't record this call, but hey, you went a little too far with this bug. So it's kind of a fun experience.
It's a hard one because, we need security people like yourself making sure that the stuff is hardened. But sometimes there's a disconnect with government perhaps or with companies. And you've got to tell us the story, if you can, about what happened at the airport.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So I was flying into the Washington Dulles airport from Japan. I was on like maybe a week vacation or something. And I was walking through the security line and everything went normal. I told them I was on vacation. Yeah. And they said, hey, stop, you're going to have to come to secondary with us. So I thought, oh, like this is weird. Maybe it's like a normal thing. I have never had this happen to me before. And a really nice police officer came and asked me a bunch of questions as he's walking me to secondary. And I sit down at secondary and there's maybe 3 people sitting in the corner who all decided to come over and talk to me at that time. We go through all my luggage. I'm like, wow, this is a really thorough secondary. And then the mistake that I made is they'd asked for my device. And I thought, it's a normal, checking process. So I gave them my unlocked device, and then they said, okay, perfect. Now come over here to this room. And inside the room, there's an agent from the IRS CI and the Department of Homeland Security. And they said, hey, Sam, we'd just like to ask you a few questions. And that's when it started getting a little personal, where they asked about my work. They knew where I worked. And it turns out that I had a summons to a grand jury in New York for where I was being suspected of like wire fraud and other crimes. And at that point, I realized I was being it was a specific investigation, and I asked for my device back, but I guess through immigration laws, they're actually allowed to keep your device and look through it as an immigration process. As an American, you don't legally have to give your device up, but a lot of time for convenience, it's just easy to just pass the device off and kind of go through. Otherwise, there's weird clauses where sometimes they may be allowed to keep it, things like that. So after that, my work kind of engaged lawyers, and we spent kind of a week where I was in this hiatus or this limbo where I didn't know whether or not I was supposed to appear or not. I didn't know what I was being accused of. And eventually what they realized is that through my normal work as a security researcher, they had thought I'd committed crime and stolen over $1 million. And after they looked through my device and spoke to the lawyers for my work and things like that, they realized that it was a mistake. But even though it's definitely a kind of nightmare scenario where I think when you're being investigated too, one of the things they'll do is kind of cross investigation. So even if I hadn't committed a crime, if there's evidence, someone else had, or there's some particular bit, they can use that and investigate someone else. So I think one big thing with security research is a lot of the things you can do, that are, you would think normal ethical vulnerability research, you can still get sued for, arrested.
Yep.
Yeah, there's a big case recently too, where a couple of guys were hired for a red team exercise, and when they're doing the red team exercise, they're arrested, and they didn't get out of jail for a week or two, because even though they were completely permitted, the government and the laws there, they'd been arrested. So it can get very vague and gray. So
it's a worry, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, I mean, if I read your an article about it or something you wrote. It was something about a crypto. You were investigating, trying to get money back from a crypto scam or something, right?
Yeah. So what had happened was there's a cryptocurrency website that it was a scam website. It was a phishing website, and the attacker, the person who'd actually hosted the website, made a mistake, and they'd hosted the private key of their wallet in the JavaScript file on the website. So really quickly, what I tried to do is take that private key and get the stolen funds out. And by doing that, I plugged it into my MetaMask, and through auditing the MetaMask, the IRS criminal investigation and the Department of Homeland Security, they saw it ping to my home IP. And that was all they needed to basically subpoena my network, get all my network traffic, and then began an investigation where they intercepted me at the airport.
So another reason to get your own router or a VPN, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to make light of it, but it's a worry, right? Just from a privacy point of view, but also security point of view, tunnel your traffic somewhere else. But it's the thing is the sad thing about that, if I remember correctly, you were trying to get the money back to try and stop the scam, but you're the one that got arrested, and it wasn't even to do with crypto, right? It was some other kind of money or just normal money or something. Is that right?
It was crypto. They had hosted kind of a crypto scam, or were targeting members of a cryptocurrency community, and I was trying to get money back for people. I was trying to go through and see if there's any recoverable funds. So by it's kind of a regular process that we'll do is look at these cryptocurrency websites, because they are malicious attackers. Sometimes they're ran by nation states, sometimes they're ran by individuals, and you can kind of fingerprint them and kind of go through them. But if the attacker had been 10 minutes slower, we could have extracted the funds and returned them to the affected users, but we were too slow, and then I ended up getting arrested for it. So
I mean, it's a worry. I'm hoping that it changes, right? I mean, so let's switch gears, if you like. I hate using that phrase, but in talking about authorities, right? Canada is banning the Flipper Zero. The Flipper Zero is the worst device in the world, according to the Canadians, when it comes to car theft. But the stuff that you've done looking at cars is actually much more scary, if you like, or impacts many, many more people, because you could do stuff remotely. You didn't have to go and just try and attack one car. So perhaps you can tell us about, the research that you did with cars, because you hacked Porsche, BMW, Rolls-Royce, Ferrari, all these big brands. So if it's okay, would you mind showing your blog and talking us through what happened there?
Yeah, sure, 100%. So to kind of introduce the car research, it was really funny, because the car research, before we hacked all these car companies, it started off really innocently, where I had done a road trip with my friends, and we'd driven across the country. We're really excited. We're just excited to get away from computers for a little bit, because, disrupting on computers 10 hours a day, right? But it was like 2 a.m. on the college campus, and we're trying to get from like one point to another, and we see these scooters, and we decided to take these scooters. So we're going across the college campus on these scooters, and we kind of think about it, like while we're riding them, we're like, wouldn't it be fun to like kind of hack these? So we drag these
can't get away
scooters
from
up.
it.
Yeah, we can't get away from the computer security stuff. So what we did is we dragged these scooters up the stairs to the dorm room, and they're beeping, and they're making all these noises, and we like wrap it up in a blanket, and we've got kind of got our laptops there, and we're looking at these scooters, and what we realize is that through a vulnerable HTTP request, we could basically, instead of pinging one scooter, so the scooters they did this thing which was really annoying where you could locate the scooters and they would flash their lights and make this really loud, audible like noise, like this music file or something. But what we realized is that through this vulnerability, like in a query, we could query every single scooter at once. So we indexed it to the college, and we're on like this second story balcony on the dorm. And we've got the HTTP request ready to go. We've got our laptop, and we stand on the dorm balcony. We send the request, and the entire campus, you hear all the scooters, the hundreds of scooters just echoing, And then the next day, what we had accidentally done was, instead of sending that request one time, it got looped. And we'd sent it so many times, that it kept going until probably like 10 or 11 in the morning. So the entire time.
And this was at like, you started at like 2, 3 in the morning, right? Sorry, go on.
We did. Yeah, we started at 2 or 3 in the morning, and we woke a bunch of people up. We checked the next morning on the college, like the student bulletin board, and there's just hundreds of posts about like what is going on with scooters. The scooters are like hacked, or like, Skynet's coming. So at that time, we felt like, you're walking around, what's going on, nobody else does. And you're like, oh, why is, there's a guy riding a scooter that's like actively honking while he's riding it. Like the whole thing was just so ridiculous. And we felt like it was just really, really funny. But we reported the bug and we got it fixed, and we kind of thought more about it. And we're like, well, I can remotely honk my car through an app the same way I can remotely flash the scooter. So we thought like, wouldn't it be kind of like fun research to see if we could just hack like a car to get it to honk? So that kind of kicked off this car security research that we did, where I'll scroll through it a little bit, but yeah, so for Kia, Honda, Infiniti, Nissan, Acura, we found vulnerabilities where you could remotely track, view historic location data, remotely start the engine, flash the headlights, honk the horn for all those brands. And you only needed the car's VIN number to do this, or an email address. And you'd think like, oh, a VIN number, that's hard to get, but every single VIN number is on the windshield of a vehicle or in the door pane, right? So if you wanted to, you could have gone through, any parking lot, scanned the VIN number through the windshield, remotely unlocked the car and started the engine, right? We also found vulnerabilities, and it's super, super fascinating, right? Because, the way I see it, right, like each of these cars is like a specific computer. There's telematics infrastructure to like send and receive commands, and there's like tracking and location data that's stored in the vehicle. So it's really fascinating because since they're used by individuals so much too, it's like you're basically able to like index an individual, track them, and then just mess with them or like steal their car, right? And some of the other vulnerabilities that we found, for Mercedes-Benz, we got access to like the employee SSO functionality. So we were able to actually make an account that was like an internal employee account. And then we were able to access like hundreds of these internal dashboards behind their company SSO. And that allowed us to do things like view source code, access their like internal chat. So for instance, when we were testing Mercedes-Benz, we registered to their internal chat, we created a user account, and then we joined, we saw like all their internal communications. We could join their like team chat. Yeah, and it allowed like a lot of potential like escalation as well. So for instance, there were like internal dealer portals that through being an employee, we'd have access and then done a full proof of concept, like access that. And for BMW Rolls-Royce, we had the ability to reset any employee account. And what that let us do is access all of the dealer functionality. So if you were to go into like a BMW or Rolls-Royce dealership, what they do is they log into a website with their employee credentials, and that can like allow them to, assign like new owners to your vehicle, access your credit, access your like financials and things like that, repairs. So we had access to all of that for every single employee. And additionally, that allowed us like, authenticate into like the email accounts and like corporate VPNs of employees.
Didn't they have 2FA or anything like that?
What it basically was, the vulnerability was an issue in their core reset password functionality, where they built a specific dashboard to like reset LDAP credentials. And what you could do with that is like through a vulnerability, you could basically generate the TOTP or the 2FA codes that you're talking about. Even though they did employ 2FA, there's an endpoint where we could generate the specific 2FA code and then use it in the password reset functionality. So we had like
crazy.
Yeah, super crazy. Like we could have fully taken over employee accounts and then access like anything that the employees could access.
I find it amazing that, people are worried about the flip of zero, whereas, I mean, that's like some guy near a car trying to attack one car, and here's you like potentially millions of cars.
Yeah, it's fascinating because like Canada's government deciding to focus on the flipper zero, I think, is just kind of like a instinctual kind of gut reaction to saying, maybe a video of somebody using it. But in reality, like car security, like at an infrastructure level, it's still really, really, I think, vulnerable. I think like even though these vulnerabilities were reported and fixed like maybe a year ago, I think now, I think an attacker could go through and do similar attacks still. So there are these systematic issues of like privacy and security where an attacker could theoretically like find the same vulnerability, generate keys to a car and steal a car like through an API. And it's really interesting too from like a attacker perspective because, like you said, instead of, throwing a brick into a window and like hot wiring a car, it's now where, a sophisticated attacker could like sell access to a service where you just plug in a VIN number and it remotely unlocks the car for them. So imagine now, like instead of like a brick, someone's just got a smartphone and they're just scanning and unlocking these vehicles and stealing them. So it's really fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing and scary that so many car manufacturers had the same issue or similar issues, that you were able to like remotely start and stop like a whole bunch of manufacturers, right?
Yeah, it was really scary. And to kind of add to that research as well, like one of the things we found was like, well, we kind of sat there after we'd hacked all these car companies. We thought, well, we've hacked probably, 60, 70% of car companies. And we were kind of frustrated because we hadn't really hacked any like semi-trucks or like bigger. And what we realized is that there was a company called Spirion, and Spirion provides a ton of hardware, like utilities to, end users like me, if I wanted to plug it into my OBD port, or like a semi-truck, or if they wanted to connect a device. And what these devices were used for is remotely disabling the starter, tracking the vehicle, monitoring everything. And additionally, what you could do is like you could send commands through the device, and that for some vehicles, it would actually send commands to CAN bus, which controls things like steering, braking, things like that. And what we realized is that through testing Spirion, we got full access to the administrative dashboard where we could access every single device and send arbitrary commands to every single device. And an attacker could have abused this to basically systematically shut down the starters on like millions of like semi-trucks or like,
wow.
I think from what we saw on the Spirion dashboard, there were about like 15.5 million vehicles that were affected. And those included things like you would be scrolling through the admin dashboard and you'd see something like one of those like Tonka trucks or like a crane or something. So these devices beyond cars, they were just connected to everything, right? And this was kind of like a single point of failure where after you compromise Spirion, you could just talk to every single device and like track them, turn them off, disable the starters. It was just really, really fascinating.
The more I talk to people like you, right, the more I think I'm going to buy like a 1940s car or something, 1980s car, something that's old, right?
Yeah, 100%. Like it really does feel like the infrastructure for it is just still kind of like a little vulnerable. I guess pretty vulnerable. So it's kind of scary.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, it's not everyone could do this, but you and your team have been able to do this and proven it. And what's worrying is all these devices are connected. It's not like, I don't know, it's not like just a computer. But I mean, cars are computers these days, but it's a computer that can cause a lot of damage. Or if they stop trucks hauling food or whatever, that's huge impact, right?
Yeah, you think about it too from like there's a lot of perspectives you can take. Since we're like the ethical people and we're like disclosing the vulnerabilities, like you don't really get to like fully go out and like try to prove an attack scenario. But the more you think about it, you think from like a nation state perspective, like if you wanted to like halt semi-trucks in the United States for like a few days, it cause like billions of dollars in backed up damages, right? It's like the Suez Canal, the boat getting stuck, right? I mean,
exactly.
From like, there's so many like interesting, our attack model is like, wanting to have fun was like, we just wanted to build an app that would like make all these cars honk at once, maybe someone's like bothering you in traffic, you go scan their VIN number and then they're driving down the road and their car's honking and they don't know why. And you're just like, that's hilarious, right? Like that's our, but it does get really serious from like a nation state perspective where it's like, you see the Netflix movie where the cars are all crashing into each other. And it's like, we've kind of built out the infrastructure for that to be possible. And even though we're doing our best at like protecting against that, there's still that theoretical possibility that like 0.1% that someone does find it, they do exploit it, and it does lead to those like massive like systemic issues.
So the issue here is it sounds like it's a problem of centralization, right? You've got this central server or the central company or whatever that has access to these millions of cars. And if you hack that, which you guys did, then you can basically control millions of devices or cars in this case.
Yeah, absolutely. Like The issue of like centralization is like really difficult because it was funny because when the cars actually started doing like this remotely managed software and this remote, like these packages, it became like a market competition to see who can build it first. And what like ended up happening was there was only a few providers like SiriusXM connected vehicle services and maybe like one or two others like Uconnect. And they built like these offerings, these car companies. And they said like, hey, Ford, hey, Kia, hey, Honda. And let's like have a relationship where we'll like put this in your car and you can use an app to like remotely manage your car. And they all said yes because that product was available. But what it led to is like now SiriusXM connected vehicle is like the single point of failure for every car company.
So just like a sidebar, which was the worst? And I mean, you just give us your opinion. I mean, if you don't want to answer, that's fine. But which was the worst and which was the best, like safest car, the most difficult to hack?
I think the worst vulnerabilities we saw were in Kia vehicles. And for the Kia vehicles specifically, you're able to do the full kind of key pairing where you're able to generate like a key pair and actually drive the vehicle away. But also what you're able to do is like remotely view cameras. So even if the car is like inside your house, from anywhere in the world, if I just plug in the VIN number, I can view your like live camera feed from your vehicle. You're not going to get notified. I can do it passively. And I'm just kind of like sitting there watching your camera, listening to the audio as well. There's microphones. So like, but I think the best, funny enough, the best secured cars were Teslas. And Tesla has like a fantastic, it's super fascinating. Even though they get a lot of like bad press for it, like Tesla has like a really competent kind of like newer age like application security team that I think like secured it a lot harder. So funny enough, with like the Tesla research, we were getting really frustrated because we couldn't hack Tesla Rivian. And we knew like people kind of wanted to read about like Teslas and Rivians getting hacked. So we're like, well, how do we do it? So I actually have a Tesla and we were sitting inside the Tesla and we kind of thought about it. And we're like, how do these SIM cards actually work? So we saw in the vehicle, there's a SIM card which connects to the telecommunications infrastructure. And we thought about it for a while and we realized that Tesla is a customer of like AT&T or Tesla is a customer of Verizon, right? Where they purchase these SIM cards. So what we realized is that like through researching Tesla's like SIM cards, what we realized is that we were able to leak the God key for all of AT&T business customers for a product called Jasper. And what Jasper was able to do is for every single AT&T business customer, hundreds of millions of customers, you could track or disable the SIM cards. So every single time a Tesla kind of like rolled through the factory, they would take a SIM card from AT&T and then plug it into Tesla. But through hacking Cisco Jasper, AT&T's product, we were able to actually like remotely disable and kill like any Tesla's internet, right? So say you're parked somewhere in your Tesla, we could just plug in you could actually query via VIN number in the system, and you could just search for a VIN number for Tesla, and I could just remotely kill your internet, and then you wouldn't get any software updates. You couldn't use your map location, and like you couldn't find superchargers, things like that. And like in the same vein, like there's it's all AT&T business customers. So think like government stuff. There's like FBI. There's any kind of company like IoT cameras. Say you want to like rob a bank and they've got like internet connected cameras. Like you hit the button, you kill them, right?
Wow.
And it's fascinating because it's like this crazy point of centralization because Cisco's Jasper actually powers like the world's telecommunication infrastructure. So through this one single system that has like maybe like 8 or 9 different telcos, an attacker who compromises it or finds like an external vulnerability could go through and compromise billions of like SIM cards or like that infrastructure. And it's just like such a crazy attack scenario.
So you guys got access to that God mode, right?
We did. We had access to all of AT&T's business customers. Yeah.
That's crazy. And the fact that you and your team were able to do this, I mean, it's a small team, right?
Yeah, it's just a few of my friends. It's very informal. We just kind of like, we hang out at conferences in real life. We'll go kind of travel together, but most of the time we're like sitting in a Discord call, like trying to figure out like vulnerabilities. It's maybe like 3 or 4 people.
And then you think what a nation state can do. And I mean, you guys are obviously elite at this, but it's worrying what, whatever nation state, whatever 3-letter agency can do.
Oh yeah, 100%. Like the teams that like governments run are like very like scary and sophisticated. So like I'd be kind of worried to see like, what certain like teams actually look like, right? Where it's like, if you can have like 3 or 4 people who are doing very specific, like wide scale impact, like it's kind of scary to think about like 300 or 400, like really elite people.
Yeah. I mean, you guys hacked ISPs to control routers. These are just some of the examples, just for everyone watching. Go and look at Sam's blog because there's a whole bunch of interesting stuff there. But like the routers is something new that I haven't read about. So thanks for sharing that. You hacked Apple. You've done a whole bunch of bug bounty stuff. So, I mean, that's for Yahoo and all kinds of things over the years. The car stuff is scary, I think, just because it's in the news with the Flipper Zero. And I mean, like, I don't know if you know what's happening in the UK, but like Land Rovers in certain parts of London can't get insurance. Land Rover have had to bring out, people in the comments can correct me, but if I remember correctly, have had to bring out their own insurance because some insurers will not insure Land Rovers in the UK because it's the most stolen vehicle, even though the CEO was saying, no, it's not. But it's such a problem because the security is so bad. But I mean, what they're focusing on is like an individual going to someone's house and like just getting into the car itself. But I mean, what you're doing is much more scary.
Yeah, 100%. I think there's still a worry. I think like if you're on the street, there's still like a practical scenario where someone like specifically targets you and does like a one-time vulnerability. But like these vulnerabilities, I think, are more worrisome from like tracking every single person or being able to like specifically target. Yeah, it really is like kind of terrifying.
Yeah, because I mean, like, I'm glad you mentioned that because I was just looking through the list now, right? You were able to track the cars. On the Kia, you were able to see the camera and listen in, but you could track that car like without the person realizing, correct?
Yep. Like, yeah, full camera and like microphone access without ever triggering a notification, just completely passively.
And then you could remotely lock it, unlock it, start it, stop it. Basically, you had full control, right?
Yeah, full control of the vehicle. Besides, you couldn't really like crash the car if it's driving or whatever. But besides that, like if you could start an engine while the car's in the garage, fill the house with like CO2, things like that, right?
That's crazy.
Yeah.
And I mean, what was interesting, you said like 70%, like even fancy vehicles, like, I mean, the Ferraris and Porsches you would think would do better, but it sounds like they were just as bad. And Rolls Royce, right?
Yeah. So for the Porsche team was like really, it was kind of funny because I was at an event actually in London and I was walking through like a HackerOne event and I actually saw a team of people and they all came up and they're excited to talk and I said, hey, we're the Porsche security team. And they're like, the vulnerability that you found in Porsche, it was only live for 10 minutes. So the entire the vulnerability that we exploited was only up for 10 minutes, but somehow we found it like in the 10 minutes that it was up. So they're kind of like, they're a little upset at us. They're not like in a friendly way where it's like kind of like,
yeah, of course.
But they said like, hey, like you do realize like how crazy a scenario that is. I'm like, yeah, like it's super crazy. But we shook hands. It was really great. And they told like a good story about like how it kind of kicked off an internal conversation about car security. So like a lot of car companies like Porsche were like a lot more secure and a lot more locked down. It was more like kind of happenstance that we found the issues, but other ones were like kind of more like systemically vulnerable. But yeah, Porsche team was great. Ferrari's like we got access to like all the customer data, so we could like query Ferrari owners and you get their like name, address, phone number, things like that. Sadly though, Ferrari doesn't have too much connected vehicle infrastructure. So even though it's like such an expensive car, you'd expect that. I guess they know what we didn't know is that, it's better to have no infrastructure at all, right?
Yeah, it's like everything, right? I think people who work in this field, it is the reason that a lot of cyber people end up going and living in the woods, right?
Exactly. Absolutely. I was going to say the like California to like Massachusetts pipeline is very real, right? People go and live in the woods. This body of research is like really fascinating because in terms of like high impact vulnerability testing, we're able to completely like take over like 15 different TLDs. And if you don't know, like TLDs are basically like, .com or .io or .net, where if you go out and you buy a domain name, like let's say you want your own domain name, it's managed by you, you'd buy like blah, blah, blah .net, right? But what you don't realize is that .net actually has the authority of your domain. And an attacker who compromises like any of these domains can basically completely compromise like any domain connected to it. So what we were able to do is demonstrate we could compromise like 15 different TLDs. So any .ai domain, any .bj, .bw, .ci, .gl, all those like TLDs, you could completely compromise like any domain hosted on it. So you could redirect traffic, you could intercept traffic, you could build out like, functionality to like compromise things. One of the funny things too is that like if you ever buy like an Amazon product, it goes through there's a scene in Mr. Robot where she's showing that she's able to get like free deliveries and free money by intercepting traffic and giving the referral code to herself, right? And what's funny is that we're able to compromise .to, and .to is the short link for Amazon's amzn.to. So through our research, like an attacker could have compromised every single Amazon affiliate link and then given themselves the money, right? So it's like a hilarious attack because it's like a Mr. Robot thing where it's like, if you ever wanted to give yourself like $1 million, it's like, wow, all of a sudden you're like the world's greatest Amazon reseller overnight. So that research is just fascinating to us because it's like so many domains are vulnerable and it's like a single point of failure.
So who did you attack to get that?
In order to compromise all these TLDs, we actually targeted software made by what's called the Council of Country Code Administrators. And what that is like, they build out all the software for the different TLDs. So if I'm .com or .io, I'm probably going to use software from this company to actually like manage my infrastructure. So by targeting these people, we found that there was like a registry software that they used that was on the internet. And what you could do is through a parameter called country, where it was like indexing like a city lookup. So the vulnerability was basically like an attacker could traverse files on the like a Linux system, and then you could read any file on the system. And one of the files you could read is like the actual SSH credentials. So on every single TLD, and like we will actually read like the root keys for the server and then just SSH into the box. In that box, it has a protocol called EPP, and EPP sits above like everything for domains, right? So if you buy a domain, there's an EPP request, and we had access to like the most authoritative keys in that whole system. So yeah, through that, you can just trigger a request to change DNS settings, change ownership for any domain in the actual TLD. And it was funny because there was a guy named Vents, and Vents actually managed the .ai TLD. So we reached out to this guy and we're like, hey, like we're actually sitting inside your box right now. Like we're in your, we're trying to report this to somebody, but we're not really sure who to talk to. It was funny because like by reporting that vulnerability to him, he invited us out to, I think like an island country to like, as our reward, we could like stay at a seastead, which is like a floating island thing he made. So it was a really fascinating like interaction.
Wow.
Where, yeah, like that was our payout. He's like, I'll give you a free few nights at my like floating seastead in the country. I'm like, wow, that's really interesting, but we'll take it.
Sam, just because I'm sometimes slow, right? You were able to take over a whole bunch of TLDs. That could have affected the cars. So just to bring it back to the cars, you could have, like if Kia or one of these other vendors were using one of those domains, you could have used that to like put up your own website.
Yeah, absolutely. Like if there's domains owned by these car companies, which there 100% are, you could have completely compromised them, hosted your own content, and like modified the existing content. So you could have like broken an API and then the car would stop working, things like that.
It's crazy. And I mean, I got to show the picture because this is obviously the picture that everyone like the picture that people imagine. Like this is not you, but this is a friend of yours pretending to be a thief, like hacking another car. This is Hyundai, I think, if I've pronounced that right.
Yep. So that is to speak about that photo. It's hilarious. So that's Nico. His alias is Spectres. He's one of the most like brilliant car hackers ever. And he was really, really fun to work with because I'm a web security guy and he's like a car security guy. He does know like a lot of web security stuff, but he's really, really good at the actual like physical car security. So being able to kind of like work together where he was able to do like a lot of the in-person hardware testing, like binding key pairs, and I was able to kind of like do like a lot of web security testing. So it really worked well together.
So I mean, yeah, you guys basically, I mean, it was hilarious when I read through this. You basically used the carriage return line feed to bypass authentication. Is that correct? Yep. You can just talk us through that. Yeah,
absolutely. So it's really fascinating the complexity of a lot of these systems now because since basically the vulnerability, like at a really simple level, is that there were two systems. There was an authorization server, and then there was an internal system that were used to like send car commands. And what it did is that when you authenticated to the authentication server, it would take your email address and pass it to the internal system that was actually used to send vehicle commands. So if you were like sam@sam.com, it would pass sam@sam.com, and that's how it would authenticate you. But there's a vulnerability in the actual registration where you could register the already existing sam@sam.com, but then you would add a new line character to the end of it. And a new line character is basically that invisible character. If you hit your enter key, it creates a new line, right? Yeah. So when you did that, you registered the account, it would pass that to that internal API. But when it got past the internal API, it would cut off the end, right? And then all of a sudden, instead of being sam@sam.com/end, you're just sam@sam.com. And what that would do is it'd give you full access to a user's vehicle, a user's account. You could view like billing information, live location of the car, everything, right? It's a really fascinating vulnerability, I think.
That's crazy. I mean, I think the question a lot of people will be having is, okay, you've told us this craziness that you've been able to accomplish, but how on earth did you go about this? Did you run the app on your phone, or did you have to have a card to test it against? I mean, you're doing a lot of these web API hacks. I mean, how did you even come about it? Like, how did you show us like sort of the workflow? How did you come across this stuff?
Every single vulnerability that we found, you could have exploited it completely remotely. You could have been in Asia and attacked someone in the United States.
Wow.
It wouldn't matter, right? To actually test the vulnerabilities, what we did is we found somebody with a car. I messaged somebody with a Porsche and like, hey, I promise I'm not going to break it, but can I have your Porsche login? And they were kind of hesitant a little bit, and they gave me the Porsche login.
I can imagine.
Yeah, and it led to kind of like being able to test like all these different car brands because people, they gave us their like logins, we had access to like their VIN number and stuff, and then through that kind of authorized testing through the mobile app or through the desktop client, all we did is we intercepted and proxied the traffic. Sometimes we'd have to do kind of certain bypasses for the mobile apps. Like we'd have to bypass SSL pinning, or we'd have to kind of like forge authorization tokens through like signature generation, things like that. But we basically just trafficked all the requests and all the traffic. We use the app normally. For instance, I would hit like start engine and I would see what that traffic looked like. And then at that point, I'd try to like go in there and try to find a vulnerability.
Using Burp or something to see what's going on, right?
Yeah, pretty much specifically, we use Corellium, Burp Suite, and our browser, right? And Corellium was used to emulate iOS and Android, and Burp Suite was just used to like intercept and modify traffic. And in our browser, in case we need to like go to a website or to create an account or something.
I mean, everyone can read the details because your blog's really detailed and explains a lot, so they can read the details on your blog. But it's, you know, when you actually look at the like just carriage return is how you broke it. It seems simple, but I'm assuming it's a lot of hard work to get to that point.
Yeah, I think there's a good quote where it's like hackers are similar to magicians in the fact that we work a lot to make look like, or sorry, the quote I think is like hackers are similar to magicians where we put in a lot of work to make what we do look easy, and the same as magicians where it's like the whole thing where it's like one big reveal, right? So even though like a vulnerability may be like one simple thing, it's like a lot of, you know, a few thousand requests to try to get to that one point where you find that one bypass that works.
Yeah, because when I look at this, it's like, how on earth could these billion-dollar or whatever size companies miss this stuff?
Yeah, it's a really interesting issue because it's like security is such like a funny ecosystem because like even though you've got pen tests and security reviews, like a billion different companies that are helping you with security, all it takes, right? It's like the defender's dilemma where one slip up causes, you know, every issue, right? To have like the crowd of people all like investigating it and like finding these like particular vulnerabilities, I think it's like slowly building a tolerance towards like eventually things being secure. But for now, there's like a lot of power in the individual where like an individual through like being unconventional and like testing like weird stuff, like they can find like these huge, crazy issues that like lead to like huge amounts of impact. So that's why like hacking, I think, is so interesting.
You're not based in New York or some big city in the States, are you?
No, I grew up and I live in Omaha, Nebraska, which is kind of like a smaller town in the Midwest in the United States. There's probably like a couple 100,000 people, but I think the first person I talked to here who did like computer stuff was like my high school's like tech administrator when I like hacked a school. And besides that, there's not many other people here who do like computer security.
But someone like you based there can have this impact that, you know, affects millions of people's lives around the world because, I mean, these are international car companies. Every one of their cars is affected by the stuff that you're getting up to.
Pretty much anybody, even if you're like 16, live in the middle of nowhere, like there's a lot of guys too. Like I work with some people in Bug Bounty who are these 15-year-olds who live in Norway. And Norway, you think is like, I mean, there's such a small little community and they're doing like the most sophisticated hacking stuff ever, right? Like the brilliant thing about computer security stuff is like, I don't like have to show my face. I don't have to show my name. Like I can be completely anonymous and still do the same like level of research, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's inspirational talking to you and others who, you know, the world has changed from my generation. When I started, it was, you know, this wasn't possible. The opportunities as a teenager didn't exist like they are today. And I think that's what's amazing, right? If you're interested in this stuff, there's nothing stopping you.
With more and more companies becoming like more and more lax about like working with hackers, they'll kind of like the whole world becomes your shooting range where as a researcher, like you can kind of go to any company you want, check their vulnerability disclosure program, try to hack them, get in touch, report the vulnerability, and then disclose it to like other people and like share your kind of research. And it's really fascinating because, you know, maybe one day you're interested in like video games, maybe another day you're interested in cars. You can kind of like switch different industries, like research and like, you know, pick whatever you want to hack. And it's really fascinating.
Big question is, how do I become you if I'm younger or like changing careers? You know, do you have any like tips and tricks from your journey? Like what do I have to study certain things? The mistakes that you made? I think I've heard you say that one of the mistakes you made is that you would hack without actually understanding the underlying stuff. But perhaps you can just tell us, you know, what would you do if you were starting today, and you know what kind of path would you take?
I see a lot of young people who want to get involved in like cybersecurity. They want to become like hackers, and they see these like really cool research posts, but like it becomes like super intimidating, right? Because they see like kind of the level of like caliber this person's got to, and they think like their path is just like too long or whatever. But I think honestly, like the one tip I would give, I think that is better than anything. It's just like have fun with it. I see a lot of people who are like stressed out. They're looking for like the 5 books to read to become a hacker. And it's like, if you just kind of chill and you have a good time with it, like get some friends on, like look at something that's kind of funny to you. Maybe like, maybe you ride the subway and you want to get like free subway tickets, and you're probably not gonna get arrested for it, but maybe you find a way to get like free entry to the subway. That's hilarious. Like that's fun, right? So like, why not have a big adventure, right? Life's kind of like this big, this big fun journey for you. So like, you don't have to be like deep in the, in the study where you're like reading through this book and like trying to bash in your head. Just make the most out of it, right? It's really fun.
You're going to learn more by enjoying it. You learn when you enjoy something, right?
Absolutely, 100%.
And you're going to put the hours in, because if you're enjoying something, the hours don't feel like work.
Yep, that's exactly what I'd say.
So it's like, what's that saying? If you find something you enjoy, then you'll never work another day in your life.
It's so cliche, but it's so accurate, right? Like, I don't know. I told my girlfriend that if computer security didn't like pay money, I would be broke, because I would just be doing it all day for fun. Like, she's like, I see a lot of people who think that like I've got like this crazy like work ethic, to get where I am, but that's not it at all. It's just I enjoy it, right? Like, I agree.
Yeah, I mean, you're not going to spend 10 hours a day trying to hack something if you don't enjoy actually doing that.
Exactly.
So I mean, that's okay. So that's different advice to what a lot of people would say. So do find something that you enjoy. Like you did gaming, and then like you said, you did cars, and then it's like this, that, or the other. Just find something that's interesting. Like the scooters is a great example, right? It was just something that you weren't supposed to be doing any computer stuff or hacking stuff, but because it was fun, you ended up doing it.
Yeah, exactly. That like 100%. I mean, the like hacking ecosystem is like so vast. You can pick like anything that interests you. Maybe you want to like build a website for like your Taekwondo gym or something. There's like a lot of like particular things. It's really fun.
Sam, I really like what you said about enjoying it, because I see a lot of people out there discouraging people new to the industry by calling them like skids, all kinds of stupid names, script kiddie, whatever. It's a problem, because we need people in this industry. And I love what you said about, you don't have to have all this pressure. You can just start, right?
There's no expectation. Like, you don't have to satisfy any criteria. You can kind of just start, like, pick something that's interesting to you, try to figure it out. Like, there really shouldn't be any expectation. If there is any expectation, you're kind of just putting it on yourself, because you can pick like any bit in the field and start.
Sam, a question I need to ask you, right? Hacking, I think, opens doors, because perhaps you don't need a lot of money. So I wanted to ask you a bit about your background. Perhaps did you have a trust fund? Did you go to university, that kind of stuff? Or, I'm assuming not.
No, yeah. So growing up, my dad was homeless kind of like my whole life, and my mom was like unemployed. Yeah. So up until I think early in high school, like freshman or sophomore years, I was the only person in my family with like a job, and I was working at like a fast food restaurant. So hacking for me, like, I never really was going to have the opportunity to end up in like a nice job. I mean, like a lot of like my like kind of older brothers, two of them, like one of them's like doing great now, but like the oldest is like kind of like he was addicted to drugs, things like that, right? So for me, like it was kind of like a happenstance, like opportunity where finding kind of like computer security. I've like traveled like the world, right? Like I've spoken at conferences in like Dubai, things like that, like been to probably like 30 countries doing security stuff, and like it's really, really crazy to me, because like growing up, I had like posters of like San Francisco on my wall, like some city where it's like I never thought I'd have the chance to do it, right? So like really goes to show, I think, like it's sort of like cliche American dream stuff, right? But it's like very very real, right? Where like
it is.
I was gonna say through the internet, anything's possible, right? Like finding that community of people and like kind of developing.
I love that, because you're not like in a big city. You're sort of in the middle of nowhere, if I understand right. You grew up poor, not an easy background, but look what you've accomplished, man. You're 24, you've sold a company, I believe, already. You've already sold your company.
Yeah. About like a year ago, I think, company was acquired, and yeah, done, I think a little bit. Yeah. It's been kind of a journey, bit of a process.
So Sam, can people reach out to you? Can they reach out to you on X perhaps, or, LinkedIn? Where's a good place to, reach out and perhaps, just follow you or get tips and tricks?
Yeah, so even though the site's kind of dying, I still use X or Twitter. It's just at SAMWCYO. But yeah, feel free to DM me. My DMs are open. Happy to help with anything or hear kind of your experience with computer security stuff. I'm still kind of young myself, so it's kind of nice to like speak to younger people and like work together. So
I appreciate it. And thanks for being an inspiration. I love the fact that you're 24, that you've been doing this for 12 years. I mean, that's crazy. But I love that, because I think what's amazing about cyber, or, tech in general, is it's not like you have to go and become a doctor and do 4 years or whatever, 7 years, whatever crazy studies that you have to do to be a lawyer or a doctor or something. You can just start this, like you said, if you enjoy it, just go for it.
Yeah, exactly. Perfect. Well, thank you so much.
Appreciate it, man. Thanks.
Cheers. Thanks, David.